Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Data-Driven Church Quick Class part number 3. In this video, we're talking about a few key financial metrics that you should be tracking within your ministry. The metrics that we'll be reviewing today are pretty standard, yet they'll give you and your team tremendous insight when it comes to evaluating church finances, especially if your church isn't currently tracking any financial metrics on a consistent basis. But this lesson will go a long way in getting you started, and I can't wait to share it with you. Are you ready? Yeah, so am I. Here we go. This section is all about evaluating your church's financial health. Managing money is one of those categories that I can and probably will end up doing an entire training video on, because it takes money to move ministry, right? Well, then as leaders, it's imperative that you clearly understand the ins and outflows of money when it comes to your church. Where is money coming in from, and how is it being spent? So in order to begin to understand this, the first metric that we need to track is total giving, unrestricted versus restricted. As the leader, you need to know how much money your ministry is taking in each week, or your total giving across a determined time period. For example, how much money did the church take in last month? How much during this quarter or last year? And most importantly, how much of that was unrestricted versus restricted? Unrestricted and restricted contributions are nonprofit accounting terms, and two of the most important ones that you and your team need to know in order to meet GAAP regulations. GAAP stands for Generally Accepted Accounting Principles, and it's a set of rules, standards, and procedures that organizations and accountants follow when creating their financial statements. These standards include nonprofit organizations, and yes, churches too. So in a nutshell, unrestricted contributions is money that you receive which has no specific fund designation. In churches, we generally see this in our Sunday morning tithes and offering. Typically, people don't specify what funds or donations should be going to, so the church can use that income toward any fund that it sees fit. This could be to pay the rent or the mortgage, or any church expenses, salaries and benefits, or any type of savings and investing. Unrestricted funds are just that, unrestricted. Restricted funds, however, must be used for the designated purpose in which it was given, and tracked separately from unrestricted funds. One of the best examples of this in church is the building fund. When people give or pledge money to the building fund, every penny of that money raised must go toward the building fund and must be accounted for and recorded separately from general tithes and offering. This is the law. Unfortunately, I've seen this law violated, especially in smaller churches when things start to get tight. This is a no-no, and trust me, you don't want to get caught violating this law and run the risk of putting your entire ministry in jeopardy. This is why, as the leader, you need to understand total given broken out by restricted versus unrestricted contributions. Let's say, for example, that your church has an awesome revival and raised $10,000 during the entire week. Pretty good, right? But as your financial secretary, I inform you that only $7,000 of that income is unrestricted. Someone wrote a check for $3,000 along with a letter explaining that the money is to be used to buy 2 new computers along with the necessary software for the church office. That means that $3,000 of that money in your church bank account can't be touched or used for anything besides those computers and that software. Now you may be asking yourself, but why is knowing that so important? And here's the reason why. Let's say that your church budget for this month was $7,500, meaning that you needed $7,500 to pay all of the church expenses. If you're just looking at that $10,000 sitting in the bank, then you might be thinking to yourself that the church is in good shape. But because $3,000 of that income is designated and restricted, the church is actually short $500, which means that the shortfall will have to be made up somewhere else. You need this type of information as a leader in order to ensure that the church is healthy financially and tracking in the right direction. These are pretty straightforward inquiries, and your finance team should be able to provide you with the giving value over any time period that you'd like. In fact, you should get some type of regular report from the finance team that tracks this metric weekly. Now in metric number 10, we're going to look at giving per average adult attendee and giving unit. And this is going to be a 2-for-1, meaning that there's actually two values that you'll calculate, even though I've slipped it into one metric. We're going to measure unrestricted giving per average adult attendee, as well as unrestricted contributions per giving unit. The first one, giving per average adult attendee, is pretty simple. Just take your total unrestricted contributions and divide it by your average adult attendance, which you can get from metric number 5, weekly worship attendance. You can do it over any time period that you want, just make sure that both time periods are consistent. Here's how we calculate it. In this example, total giving for week 22 is $3,752. We'll divide that number by the total number of adult attendees for the same time week. In this example, it's 67. So the total giving per attendee for week number 22 is 56. Now I need to warn you, this ratio is more likely going to be lower than you expected because it's taking into account your total contributions and spreading it across all of the adults that are attending your weekend service, regardless of whether they gave anything or not. So it includes visitors as well as regular attendees. And you may be wondering how a metric like this is valuable. Well, it is, and I'll explain more about how you can use it in a minute. But for now, let's keep going. The next part of this metric is calculating total unrestricted giving by giving unit. Now, a giving unit is a group of family members or any recurring supporter of the ministry who contributes jointly to the church. Now, in this definition, there are a few key explanations that I need to give you. Number 1, a group of family members. And number 2, recurring. Think of it like this. A giving unit is the amount of money that you regularly receive from a single household. If a single person gives every month, that's counted as one giving unit. If a husband and wife give collectively to the church each week, that's still counted as one giving unit. Even if they write 2 different checks, we still count it as one giving unit because it came from the same group of family members. Now we also need to consider the other part of the definition, which is recurring. This means that we don't count people who give sporadically or whenever there's a special offering. We only count consistent recurring givers. And in order to identify your consistent givers, you'll need to specify a minimum amount of time that you identify as recurring. For example, someone who has given at least monthly over the last 3 to 4 months. This will eliminate anyone who may donate, let's say, $1,000 toward a special offering, but who doesn't generally give. You can still give them an end-of-the-year statement because they gave over $600 without actually counting them as a giving unit. And once you have your total giving units for your church, you can take your total giving and divide that amount by your total giving units. And that calculation looks like this. Total unrestricted giving divided by the total number of giving units gives you the total contributions per giving unit. So why are these values so important to know as a leader? Because when you begin to measure them over time, they begin to paint a clear picture about giving patterns within the ministry. As membership increases, are your giving units increasing? As the economy strengthens or weakens, is your total giving per attendee changing or staying the same? This metric can also be used as a tool for projecting giving during future time periods. For example, if giving units were increased by 10 over the next few months in this case, you could forecast that the total unrestricted giving would go up by $1,720. This can make a big impact on the church's finances, allowing it to increase its ministry reach. This next metric is a ratio which compares giving per average adult attendee and giving unit to the local median household income. Phew, that's a mouthful, right? But don't worry because it's really simple since it's building off of metric number 10, which we just did. I like this metric, and as a pastor or leader, I think you'll like this metric too. Let me show you how I suggest using it. First, you need to get the annual median household income for your particular area. In Charlotte, North Carolina, ours is $53,274, so I'll use this number for our example. If you break this income down by month, you get a median monthly household income of $4,439.50. Let's say that Cross Church in Charlotte, North Carolina has an average weekend attendance of 130 adults and 79 giving units. Last month, our total contributions, and I'm just doing this over unrestricted giving for now, was $16,741. This calculates out to be $128.78 per adult attendee and $211.91 per giving unit. When I divide these values by the average median household income, I get the following giving percentages: 4.8% per giving unit and 2.9% per adult attendee. This is the giving pattern at Cross Church based on the average annual median income for our area. Now, as a pastor or leader, here's what this tells me. If I preach and teach that people should give 10% of their income as tithing, then my church has some opportunity. This ratio confirms what I as a pastor probably already feel in my gut, that we have some people in our church that give faithfully, but many more who don't. So as a leader, how do I challenge our members to grow in their faith to increase their giving? Maybe our church members' household income falls on the lower end of the average median income for our area. Well, if that's the case, then again, as a pastor, I need to prayerfully consider how do we help our members increase their household income. Now, this certainly isn't the forum to identify solutions, but I just wanted to show you how, as a leader, this metric can help you make better decisions and help you lead more effectively. By the way, let's say that we were able to increase the percentage of contributions from your church's giving units from 4.7% to the goal of 10%. That would increase the total income for the church for that month to $35,072, which is an additional $18,331 or 109%. Using these metrics will either validate your training on stewardship or show you where more training and teaching is necessary. The last metric in this section is your budget breakdown analysis. Now, this is one of those metrics that you should be tracking each month. You're looking at both your income and expenses to see how close the church is at meeting its financial goals. What you're looking for is variance from the budget. What was planned versus what was actually received and spent. Some church accounting software will give you this automatically. However, there's nothing wrong with an Excel report, especially if your church is still small or just starting out. It's as simple as having an extra column on the budget report that either gives you the actual amount spent or the percentage reached. This is what's shown here. The important thing is to track your budget actuals to plan. This lets you know if you need to make adjustments in the following month and allows you to be prepared for church expenses that are both planned and unplanned. Coming up in our last class, our final section is called Volunteer and has 2 final metrics. This section will help you as a leader track engagement of members within the ministry. We all know that getting people off the sidelines and into the game is a constant challenge. But being successful begins with understanding where people are within the ministry and their level of commitment. And I can't wait to share it with you, along with some other great tips and information. Well, my friend, that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching. I can't wait to see you in the next video.